Hello, personal productivity enthusiasts, and welcome to Anything But Idle, the Productivity News podcast. I'm Ray Sidney-Smith.
And I'm Augusto Pinaud.
And we're your hosts for Anything But Idle. Each week, this is episode 28, and we're recording this on November 9th, 2020. Each week, we cover and discuss the productivity news headlines of the week with our commentary. And of course, to do that, we have two panelists that we invite to the show each week to talk about the things in personal productivity and technology. Today, we have our two guests, Ami Devereaux and Art Gelwicks. Ami Devereaux is an executive coach and strategy consultant, the founder of Beyond Better, and the host of the Beyond Better community. She's a keynote speaker, workshop presenter, and a member of the Forbes magazine Coaches Council. Ami also sits as an advisory board member of two startup accelerators, as well as on the boards of directors of several private companies. Welcome to the show, Ami.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Augusto.
Welcome. All right, next up is Art Gelwicks. Art Gelwicks has been on the show before. You know him as the productivity and collaboration consultant, as well as the blogger at the Idea Pump. He's the host of Being Productive podcast, and he joins Augusto, Francis Wade, and myself each week on the podcast Productivity Cast. Welcome to the show, Art.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Good. All right. So welcome to our audience watching live, the listeners who are listening on the podcast. Welcome. And this week's theme I thought would be kind of interesting and fun to talk about. Since the COVID-19 pandemic has begun, there's been a clash of data and perspectives on whether remote work can work. As well, technology companies are battling over dominance. And what I wanted to do in titling this show, The Remote Work Productivity Wars Continue, it was the idea that we have, in essence, two different wars going on, two different battles of productivity technology, as well as companies working and vying for their employees to be most efficient and effective inside their environments. And what I thought we would do to start off is basically ask the questions, will remote work win? And which tech giant will come out on top? Ding, ding, ding. The battle's on. Go for it, on me.
Well, so no, remote work won't win, but it's going to be a long time before we resolve that. And that's not to say that remote work's going to disappear. Of course, it's not. We've had distributed workforces for a long time. But what's going to happen is that companies that have gone entirely remote are going to experience a massive, what economists call a tail effect, about 2 years from now, because all of their junior and middle level employees are not getting any of the tacit learning that is how all of us in this generation learned how to be part of an organization. And there's a mistake, a kind of implicit mistake that we are probably all guilty of on this podcast just by virtue of its theme, which is to mistake efficiency and productivity for organizational optimization. And organizations are much more than the efficiency with which they get things done. And if you intend to have a succession plan and to have successors to your current senior leadership, you need a huge range of people coming up behind who are learning how to be leaders, learning how to be collaborators, learning how to be cooperators, learning how to be innovators, and learning how to have lives outside of work, all of which, if we all think back to how you met your spouse or where you got your social context, probably all happened at the workplace. And if you're entirely remote, none of that happens. So the tail effect will be there is no succession possible because nobody has the expertise to basically elevate into the next level. That's my projection 2 years from now. Big problems.
Okay, I totally disagree. So let's start with that. And here's why I disagree. Yes, there's a lot of value to physical proximity, but the evolution of a person through the ranks of a corporate environment or a workplace environment does not necessarily have to be dictated by physical proximity. Leadership needs to learn that they don't have to be standing over one shoulder to help someone along. I work with a distributed company. My primary company is 210,000 people with 100,000 based in India. That distributed type of environment is just daily operation. Pre-COVID, post-COVID, doesn't matter. I agree that there is a lot of value to being able to sit down face to face with someone. And pre-COVID, when video technology was not the de facto standard that it is now, yeah, you're right. You wouldn't have it over conference calls. You wouldn't have it over chats. But a lot of that is mitigated by what we have now. And what we have to do is we have to grow up. We have to learn as professionals and as managers and as leaders that we can't say that people aren't going to do this stuff just because we're not sitting there with them. It's a new world. We have to get used to that. And productivity, you're right, is not just dependent on efficiency and effectiveness. It's also based on the psychology and the emotional intelligence necessary to make sure people are being productive and feel like they're being productive, which I think is probably the more important part.
Actually, you very much misstated what I said.
Okay.
I did not say that productivity would suffer.
Right.
I said that organizations would suffer.
See,
Wait, hang on. I don't think productivity suffers at all. And I have no compunction. I have worked remotely most of my life, and most of the companies that I consult to and coach have, at the very least, distributed engineering teams, if not entire organizations. Mm-hmm. The problem isn't that you can't get meetings done or projects done or work done. The problem is that everything else, meaning accidental collisions, meaning running into people in the elevator, discovering new social outlets, meeting people at the bar after work. I'm not talking about getting the work done. I'm talking about getting the rest of life done that often that lives in the nexus of work and not work. When everybody is working out of their home, what you've done is you've limited people's perspective to solely productive conversations and home life. They've lost all of the texture that happens between home and work and in all of the ancillary interactions that take place that are non-productive, but that are adding to our emotional growth, our leadership growth, our collaborative growth, our discovery of new interests and new people and new subjects. That's what gets lost.
And I'm not going to disagree. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you on that from one perspective, but I think it's a narrow view. For example, this morning we sat for the Productivity Cast podcast. We sat, the four of us, in a Zoom chat and worked on different things. But we sat together in this session and talked, and we're able to have side conversations and talk about different things and talk about politics and talk about work. All the things we would normally do. However, one of us is in Jamaica. You know, we're all over the place, but we would never have that. That was you. One, you wish.
I do.
We would never have that opportunity without the remote work. So while I'm going to agree that there is definite value to physical proximity, I would say that if we look at it from the standpoint of this not being an opportunity to grow and improve as organizations, an organization that cannot grow and adapt to become better through this, honestly, is an organization that really needs to change. It has become ancient.
I didn't say that won't happen. You have to remember, you're talking about the Productivity Cast or even this group. We are all 4 decades into our careers.
Oh, I'm not even worried about that.
I'm talking about people who are 20, 25, 30, 35.
I have direct reports for that. I have a group of people in that age group. Yes. And but they're also more comfortable with this than our generation is.
You are interpreting what I'm saying as some kind of a attack on remote tools or remote work, which I'm not doing at all. In fact, I'm very much in favor of remote work and remote tools. Okay. However, there is an aspect to proximity that cannot be replaced remotely. For example, one of the things that I see happening in almost all of my client companies is that whereas when people worked in a headquarters or at a Starbucks for that matter, mm-hmm. they met all kinds of people who were not in their direct purview of responsibility. So if you were on the product team, you ran into engineers and you ran into salespeople and you ran into people who worked in different companies and you ran into people in the elevator who were running the marathon but who didn't work in any company you knew. And you ran into the barista at Starbucks and on and on and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. Now what's happened is that in the companies with which I work, they only talk to people with whom they work. Or, in the case of Productivity Cast, you guys are all brought together by a shared interest in productivity. You've already discovered that interest. How would you have discovered that interest had you not had all of the experiences you had prior to COVID that brought you together in this remote setting? Unless you worked for the same company, you wouldn't even have met.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take the technology angle here, which is to say that I think that we have a proliferation of technologies that are going to be able to solve for some of these problems, and until then, I think the same problems will exist where management that is not forward-thinking and is not capable of embracing the technologies that I'd also like to talk about before we move on are going to suffer. I think that there are some really amazing software that are coming onto the kind of deck right now, and those technologies actually give some of that serendipity that you're talking about, Ami, and provide for that. But it does require management to both be mindful and to be willing to embrace those technologies. And to Art's point, I think it's really important that those companies that are progressive in terms of their technology, adaptation and adoption, that they also have good policies in mind to not soak up and sap up the productive energy that would otherwise be committed toward efficiency and effectiveness because they're too busy trying different social functions that end up causing them more harm than good. Google constantly comes up against this problem, right? How much is fun and how much is actual productive energy and a productive output? And I think that it is a kind of a mixed bag, right? And we're going to see that churn happen over the next several years, certainly as we see ourselves come out of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also people recognizing that, hey, I can work from home forever. And those of us who are seasoned in our workforce, we're going to be more likely to want to stay home. And because we already are fixed in our, people know us, we have that social component, we have that ability to have lateral movement and upward movement because of that. So
there is two things.
Go ahead.
So Art and then Augusto.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I was not coming across as like jumping up and down on your topic, because I think we're saying the same thing from two different perspectives, and let me try and
so too.
Pull it to a center point. This is not an either or. It's not a zero-sum game. I think what we're talking about, both of us, all of us, is that leadership needs to be educated on the benefits and the liabilities of this new way of working, this new world. And it's here to stay in some level, whether it's 10%, whether it's 90%, whether it's somewhere in the middle, doesn't really matter. But you're absolutely right. Those perspectives of somebody coming into the workforce and normally having a mentorship relationship with somebody who they sit next to or whatever, these are all factors that have to be taken into consideration and applied. And I think many times management and leadership get those blinders on and they say, okay, if you're working from home, then you're not going to get any of this. Or if you're working in the office, then you don't get those benefits. And it's the other side too. People who aren't working from home feel like they're left out of the mix. And there isn't a clean thing, but I think these are all really valid points that every organization has to take into consideration. And it's cultural within the organizations too. Every organization's culture is different, and they react to and handle this differently as well, I think.
And I think there is a couple of things I want to bring. One is, I said this at the beginning of the pandemic, and I said there is a big change coming with all this. Okay, there is the people, maybe like me, who has been working home for years. Okay, who work for years to accomplish working from home. Okay, guilty of charge. Okay, there is other people who was interested in the idea but didn't know how to present it to the organization, make it work. Okay, and now found, okay, I'm here, I'm not coming back. You company figure it out or I will figure it out. And then you have the third group of people who were the people who were not convinced about this idea, and now they're convinced that this is not what is for them. And there is a big group of those people at different levels who miss the going to the office, miss the structure of this is my house, this is my office, who need that structure, and really who has been struggling with this. But also I think this will be an interesting change on the horizon of things. And I see it with my two kids. My daughter thrives in the school. Okay, in front of people, she thrives, make the friends, no issues. She is dying at home. Okay, she's struggling. And it's not. She has all the technology. Okay, it's not a lack of technology. It's not a lack of. Is her personality needs that human contact, okay, that she is not getting right now, that she's 100% virtual, and she is struggling, not academically, okay, she's struggling with that element. People, as they grow, who have that physical need will continue to struggle and will be part of that third group that need to go out. My son, instead, okay, is thriving like he has never thrived, because one, he can go faster. Okay, we are having the opposite issue, okay, of the teacher calls and say, okay, we tell the teacher, you need to give the dude more work because he's done by 9:30, okay, and he's driving us nuts. Please send him more work to the dude. Okay, but at the same time, he's been making friends, okay, friends that he did not make at school before, because now he has found interest that he had that he can share with them. Yes, he has get in trouble for that, but that's beside the point, okay? But he's now texting the people, sharing the interest. So he's really going to be, he's thriving. So also I think this is going to leverage, because when we were all at home and it was really a minority of the people who had that opportunity, really those people with the social tend to went up much faster than the people who struggle with that. Now that's going to allow them, both groups, to find what fits well and everybody to grow up.
I would just say one thing to that, actually two things. One is that most of what you said, Augusto, is looking at it from the perspective of the, let's for want of a better word, call it happiness of the student, employee, or whatever. That's a component, but it's not really the one I'm pointing to, I don't think it's unimportant. I think it's quite important. But there's a whole other dimension that I think is very, very difficult for us, whether we're leaders or just as a function of our generation, and the amount of grooming, training, experience, and so forth that we've already had, that's very hard for us to see. And that's what it feels like if you are, just to give you an example, I mostly work with C-suite startup founders and their leadership team. I have been tasked with working with tons of middle managers since the pandemic began, because they're falling apart. They're literally falling apart. They don't know how to do their jobs like this. They're having anxiety attacks, panic attacks. They're in despair, having depression, freaked out, anxiety. All kinds of stuff. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have the training to deal with anything clinical. This isn't really clinical. This is situational. And it's a function of a reality that happens if you're 25 or 26. This is your first job after an internship coming out of an MBA. You're living in a flat in New York City with a flatmate or your family, which means you're living within 4 walls and under 600 square feet. And that is your world. That's approaching that novel Room that came out 5 or 6 years ago. It's crazy making. And then, people like us are talking about, well, are they maximizing productivity? Well, yeah, they're maximizing productivity. They're just losing every other part of themselves. And I'm not sure that as leaders, we can see what we don't know that we don't know. We can't anticipate the cost of this on the growth of our up and comers, on the succession planning of our company, on the collaborative ability of widespread departments within an organization, the impact it has on an organization's ability to interact with people they have no reason to talk to other than that they work for the same company, and on and on and on. A whole cascade of potential unintended consequences that are very, very difficult to foresee right now. That's what I'm pointing to as the tail effect. It's an unknown. And by no stretch of the imagination am I saying that remote work is going away. Don't.
Oh, no. I had a client
take a step back from this. Yeah. Twitter and Facebook and Google, who have all said, all right, y'all can work at home forever. They're going to come back from that. They're not going to stay there because it's going to be too costly.
I had a client like that you described. He He said, we were living in what we thought was a great house, no problem, until me, my wife, and my two teenagers needed to move back into this confinement, and we discovered the house didn't work as well as we thought when everybody had an office and a place to go.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that we touched base on the tech part of this, which is also important, and then we've got to get into the headlines, lest we will be here for 3 hours. And so, who do you think is the tech giant that's going to come out on top? I will, in full disclosure, say I am the Google Small Business Advisor for Productivity, so I am clearly biased, at least in that regard, as being a heavy Google user. But I will say that I think that all of the tech giants currently are vying for some level of capacity and attention, so that people use them instead of the others. And what do you think this will all kind of fall out? I'll throw this to you first, Art, as our resident Microsoft person.
Well, okay, there. You just stole my thunder, because it doesn't matter what other company you've got. It's how long of a footprint, or how big of a footprint you have in all the things you need to be able to do and to be able to deliver from any size organization. And the fact that Satya Nadella has been taking the concerted effort to move Microsoft to a cloud-based organization while still maintaining the long-term experience of what Microsoft is all about, yeah, I think they got it.
I actually think you need to parse this according to for what. So I happen to be a little bit sweet on Google Hangouts for work meetings, largely because it gives you freedom from the Zoom staring into your own eyes problem, which I think I do think is problematic. On the other hand, I think Zoom is likely to be the technology of choice for the general public to be virtual. Like if you're going to get together with your grandma and your family for a virtual Thanksgiving, you're more likely to do it on Zoom than on Google. But if you're going to host a happy hour for your team, you're more likely to do it on Google. And I don't have a lot of experience with Microsoft Cloud because I avoid their cloud component like the plague, although I am a PC Microsoft user. So
I wish that Google win this race. And sadly, I don't know why. Okay, Google Meet, even that it has made progress, has not made the progress at the speed that Zoom or Microsoft has done with Teams. And on a race where Google Meet was the favorite, really he has lost an incredible amount of race against Teams and against Zoom, to the point that we live in my company in Google Meet. I have clients who live in Google Meet, so I spend more hours really in Google Meet than Zoom or Teams. But when I get to go to Zooms or I got to go to meets in Google Teams, I admit that they are way ahead of where Google Meet currently is. And I understand we just put a fresh coat of paint into Google Meet, but it's still a coat of paint. I need the inside to work much better than what is working currently.
I think it's interesting that we are so heavily focused on the video meeting technologies of these companies and not really on the wide kind of birth of applications. Microsoft has done a lot of work integrating Teams with a whole variety of other different technologies, Planner, To-Do, projects otherwise, and Art is able to speak to this much more than I can, but they have done such a remarkable job of pushing out new features and new technologies to connect into the kind of Azure environment. At the same time, Google has converted G Suite to Google Workspace and has now given us an infrastructure that really connects a lot of the pieces within the apps. So wherever you are inside of Gmail or Google Calendar, or even inside of Google Calendar, Google Calendar Gmail or otherwise, you are now connected to the other parts of the ecosystem. And I'm really interested to see how those pieces actually kind of meter out the substantial growth of the user bases versus actually the meeting technologies, because I think that meeting technologies will be used if they're free in the consumer space, and they will be utilized by the dominance of the particular parties in the commercial space. For example, the number of Microsoft Teams meetings I have been in, I can count on one finger.
Same here.
I've not been in any. And the reason for that is because I have Zoom and I have Google Meet, and I'm a Google Workspace shop, and so I'm going to be in that space. And since I am scheduling the majority of the meetings that I'm scheduling, people are scheduling with me. I'm choosing the meeting tool that we're meeting with. It just ends up being very easy to steer people toward those pieces. So I'm not particularly concerned about the virtual meeting technologies. I am very concerned about the choice of tools, and ultimately I think that we're going to have a separate kind of a split market. Half will be Google, half will be Microsoft. I don't see either really dominating in terms of a particular vertical other than education, where Google has done a pretty remarkable job of capturing the education market. And I just see it being kind of a mishmash. I don't think either is going to claim victory in the war. I think it'll just end up being an issue that we're going to have a lot of third parties kind of create market share, and that'll be good. It's good to have competition, but at the same time, I think that we will see those two dominant parties exit the war. I think better for all of us. I think we'll all be better off for both Microsoft and Google to get their act together and make productivity software that actually works for us. Art? Response.
I would say that,
rebuttal.
Well, it's not really a rebuttal. I mean, it's one of those situations where when you look at it from an organizational standpoint, if you have a smaller organization, you often have the option to choose from various tools in the marketplace. If you are deploying tools for a 15,000 person organization, 10,000 person, 5,000 person, the old axiom, nobody ever got fired by IBM or for buying IBM. Well, now it's nobody ever gets fired for buying Microsoft. Why? Because this stuff is designed to work together. Small, large scale, multi-dimensional applications, everything is hooked together. It's not perfect, no, but it is all hooked together, and it gives you that unified platform from an organizational standpoint where you can roll things out and know that you don't really have to be concerned about those interconnects. You don't have to be concerned about Google going and deciding, hey, we don't want this product anymore, and dropping it off the radar like they are wont to do. That being said, I use Google for a lot of things. I use Zoom somewhat. I think a good example of where this is going is the video technology market because of COVID, because we have seen a great example of the competitive nature of technology and the overall benefit of that competitive nature. I mean, these video technologies have grown in leaps and bounds like ways they have never done before, never even considered, and it has changed thinking too. Think up until March of this year, how often you would jump on a video chat with someone. Rarely, if ever. I mean, you might, but it's doubtful. Or a conference call would be replaced with a video conference. That was the hype that was always sold to people at conferences. You'll be able to do this. Now it's the de facto standard. This is what we've got. This is how we get around this issue, and it won't go backwards. So the companies that are supplying this stuff, again, I go back to Microsoft because honestly, they've got the longest track record of any company out there in doing this stuff. They've been doing this since the old MS-DOS days. They've been able to put tools on the table for people to be able to use. Again, are they perfect? By no means. I mean, I spend a lot of time just fighting with some of their platforms. But ultimately, when you choose something like this, choose a platform and stick with it. Don't bounce around. Pick something
Absolutely.
And make it work.
Wonderful. Ami, final thoughts on our
If we're going to move on, that's okay. Nothing pressing.
Okay, wonderful. We're gonna move on. This has been a great opening discussion. I didn't expect us to have such a long time explicating on the topic, but this has been really great. I've really appreciated everyone's thoughts. And so with that, let's get into our headlines for this week. And so with that, Augusto, what is our first headline this week? You're muted.
That's a skill.
That's the first time this show, or won't be the last time this show.
It won't be the last time on the show. That's a skill. I talk and talk and talk mute. I do it for our audience. So the closing art comment on Microsoft, let's start in Google instead. So Google now offers VPN for those plans that are 2 terabytes and higher. And it is interesting because not that as the VPN.
Let's explain.
That the
so hold on a
VPN
second. For those who are watching and listening, Google One is the storage product. So if you have Google Drive, Gmail, Google Calendar, or otherwise, if you purchase a plan that's the 2 terabyte plan or higher, you will then get access now to a new service Google is rolling out called Google VPN or Google One VPN. I can't remember which. But the idea here now is that you will then get a virtual private network. So say that you have your Android phone out at a cafe. Someday that will happen again. And you're sitting there and you want to open up your phone and connect. You will be able to connect to the VPN, which is a no logging service. Google has confirmed that they are not logging the system. They're only doing it to the effect necessary to be able to handle it for you, where you can now not be subject to the sniffing that happens on a public network. So
I have a question about this. I saw this news come out whenever it was a couple days ago, and I've been shopping VPNs now for the better part of 2 years, having a little bit of a decision issue, as you might imagine, because I am not a technologist or a technician, more importantly. And so I'm just curious to know how user-friendly Google's VPN will be, not for my Android, but actually for my desktop, which is where I'm most concerned about Comcast deciding all kinds of things I'd prefer they not decide.
Yeah, this is a great question. And what will happen is Google's going to roll out both a VPN product for Mac and Windows. Those products will be desktop applications that allow you to connect. If you were looking for a VPN solution, it's going to be really affordable, because if you're already paying for Google storage, or if you are not, it's built into the price. I mean, it's really economical at $100 a year. I'm going to guess they're probably going to bring that cost up over time, but the reality is that's really economical, and it gives you the ability to, in essence, set it and forget it. I mean, once you turn on a VPN, it runs in the background, so you don't really have to think about it. The things I think about when I think about it, I'm geographically situate in a space where I can choose multiple different destination points, multiple servers, and sometimes one will give me greater speed than the other. So that's really the only issue, is which server is going to give you the highest speeds, and then you set it and forget it and you go on with your day. If for some reason your internet is slow, you can just go ahead and choose your next nearest city and see if you get faster speed. That's all.
Yeah, and I think Ray's hitting on probably the most important aspect with VPNs. I live in VPNs all day long, and your performance will take a hit regardless of what VPN you use. That's kind of a given. Connectivity, how it remains up. Does it remain up? Does it drop you, bounce you? Does it time out? I have VPNs that time out after 12 hours, which is great, but it's a thing. The other thing with VPNs, though, and this is, again, Google, read the fine print. Just because they're keeping everybody else out doesn't mean they're not taking a look at the traffic. And this applies to... Yeah,
they have already made the public statement that they will not be logging for their own purposes at all. This is a clear.
But that doesn't mean it'll stay that way, Ray. They could easily change the TNC a year from now. I mean, I have Dropbox and avoid all of those. I mean, right. Whether it's Microsoft or
they
Google,
would need to make an overt statement to that effect, and it would be on the front page of every major. You would hear me talking about how terrible that a choice of that is for Google to go out and say, we're not going to log, we're not going to do these kinds of things, and then to turn around and go ahead and start logging. It would be catastrophic for them public relations wise. It's too much of a big hit for them. This is a company that has to go out there and prove their trust every day with people, right? They're already skeptical of the company. So to go out and do something as really pervasive as being a VPN on your system and then choose to start logging, it would be too high a bar for them to make that kind of change.
Yeah, and
aren't they still logging through Calendar and Gmail and Navigator?
No, that's a different thing, because a lot of that is based on the fact that you want to be able to search. If you want search capability within your own applications, the content has to be indexed somewhere. But things like VPN data traffic, that's a different piece, because it has no direct connection to their actual data. So Ray's right. If they were to say, a year from now, well, we're going to kind of keep an eye on your data for maybe for optimization. Yeah, they're going to catch all kinds of flack. I don't want to give the impression that I would not use a Google VPN. I would use a Google VPN way over any of the free VPNs that are out there. Why? Because you go to the old axiom. You're either paying for the product or you are the product. And in this case, VPN is a great example of that. It's one of those things where they're either going to try and push you content or push advertising through their VPN connection. But I don't see Google doing any of that. Google has a very vested interest in getting as much traffic in and off the internet as possible. And the environment that we have, if we go back to our previous conversation about remote work connectivity, because you now have so many people who previously had hard, secure connections through, in many cases, Ethernet connections within an office space, but now are running off of their home VPN or home LAN, not even LAN, Wi-Fi that is probably misconfigured and misset up in many cases.
And this not type updated.
And not updated. And we could go on the whole cybersecurity rant. But it comes down to
episode.
Yes, it was a previous episode, could be another one. But it all comes down to how turnkey can this be. I think Google stands a very good chance of making this very turnkey. And that I think would be the best thing, because as is with password managers, a VPN is better than no VPN.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't ever considered a free VPN. I've only considered paid VPNs. And part of my resistance to Google's VPN would be that I don't want Google's cloud storage. I actually actively dislike Google's cloud storage functionality and UI. And actually, I have several clients who feel exactly the same, and they're all tech clients. And they all use Google, but they really dislike it. It doesn't have a particularly intuitive ability. I mean, it just isn't a good knowledge management system. And as that's where you're storing everything, it's a kind of like a giant heap. You're just putting things in a heap. And
I'm going to respectfully disagree.
Yeah, that's again another episode.
I'm reporting from the field, but I'm certainly not an expert on it. Although I struggle with my own Google storage, and I only keep like the very few things there because most everything I have is in Dropbox. It's also not in Microsoft 365, although they also keep trying to get me to put everything there. I don't want to put anything in either box, frankly. I'd rather pay for my own storage. But
so there's two things that I want to add to this. One is that the VPN, as well as Windows and Mac, will also come for iOS, and Google has said that already. So, and that is a really big deal because the good solutions for the people who live on the iPad are limited. So I'm having a good hope for that. I pay for a VPN for my iPad, but I'm excited to see some big player coming in to that game. So I think that is important, and I think the fact that they are trying to make it invisible for the user, and that will be the end goal. That the users who really don't understand cybersecurity, the people which password is still password 123, will be able to activate this and be more secure. And as I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, I think the fact that Google is bringing the concept of VPN to the world, to the masses, it is a fantastic thing, because there is still an incredible amount of population who don't know what VPN is or don't understand why that may be important.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I would love for the world to be educated enough to stop using Starbucks Wi-Fi, thinking that that's in any way, shape, or form secure, or the airport's Wi-Fi, or all the numerous conferences I've gone to where I've had fights with the conference organizer because it's not a secure Wi-Fi. And for that alone, you're right. It's a huge contribution Google's making.
Yeah, so anyone who is currently on iOS and Android and wants a free VPN, one that I can affirmatively recommend is 1.1.1.1. It's a program developed by Cloudflare, and it is well managed. You can pay for the service to get faster connection, and so they're going to be able to do that obviously at a higher bandwidth than the 1.1.1.1 that's free. And then obviously once you get to the desktop, OpenVPN has their own product called Private Tunnel. If you go to privatetunnel.com, it's very inexpensive for multiple devices, and they give you lots of connection points around both the country and the world. So it's affordable. It's very easy to use. There are others that are out there. I tend to find them a little bit slower. I've used TunnelBear, and ExpressVPN is probably the best known and well audited, but I tend to find them to be overly pricey for something that is supposed to just be in the background and not really be my, I don't want to pay dollars for something that I'm already paying for on top of it with internet and so on and so forth, with as many employees as well. Everybody's kind of using the same service, and I want it to be affordable. Private Tunnel really does a great job there. All right, moving right along, I wanted to just note some other Google updates. One is that Google Workspace currently, I believe this is within the education and enterprise space. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. They are now adding Google Meet background replacement features to it. So now you can start to replace your background in Google Meet. Obviously, this is going to roll out to more Google Workspace users over time, and hopefully down to the consumer market. But right now, you're able to now start seeing those who are in education and in enterprise have that background replacement feature. Replace your background is the feature. You have to have a strong enough computer and strong enough camera in order to be able to do that. So, and you have to have an updated browser. So you have to be running the latest versions of either Chromium-based items or otherwise. I'm not even sure if it supports Firefox, but you can go ahead and do that. And then just finally in the Google news, Google Messages is starting to roll out a message scheduling feature. I have not gotten it yet. Believe you me, I have been trying and updating, and I actually run the Google Messages beta app, and so I have not seen it on my Pixel device. Google, if you're listening, I want message scheduling. But this is going to be really phenomenal. You will now be able to long press on your Google Messages send button, and normally you'll just see the pop-up that gives you the subject line. So you can add a subject line within SMS, and that's in the protocol, in the SMS protocol. But then you will now be able to see a little clock icon where you can go ahead and schedule a message to go out at a later time. This matches your ability to long press on messages in Google Messages and snooze them so that you get a reminder to come back to that message later. Now you'll be able to actually send messages outbound on a schedule to I'm presuming within group SMS as well as in singular one-to-one messages. So good on them for that.
And that is awesome. That has been, I'm going to drop my ID and when I start using computers, but for many years, when I moved from the PC to the Mac, that was the feature I missed from Microsoft, because Outlook could do that for the beginning of time, and most things cannot even do it on 2020. So I get emails, and I said, great, let me respond, but I don't want them to go out because I know they're going. Let me schedule them to later, and not every mail application, not every email application do it out of the box. That I think is ridiculous. And I think as ridiculous as that is, you should be able to get a message from somebody at 11 p.m. and respond to that and said doesn't send until 7 in the morning, regardless the application you're using. And that it's good for Google to come with that. And I hope the others innovate on that or copy so we can have it everywhere.
Fantastic. Next up, we have a little bit of a product review. For those of you who know or don't know, FreeWrite is basically an analog formatted keyboard with kind of an e-ink display. And so you have this keyboard, and it's kind of like a fixed typewriter looking device that you can go ahead and use. And in essence, this is a kind of a high-end writing tool. And you know my love of single-purpose devices that help you be more productive. The Amazon Kindle being probably the most notable of those, but certainly writing tablets, the Rocketbook notebooks, things of that nature that really limit your. It's kind of like blinders on a horse in a race. It allows you to be able to be productive in a particular vein of your productivity. And so the FreeWrite company has now put out a new one called the FreeWrite Traveler, and it is a clamshell style tool now. And in essence, you can just, it's hinged, so you close it up, stick it in your pocket, and go. It's 4.7 inch primary display, and then it has a 2.7 inch writing window. And so again, it uses e-ink, so it has a really long battery life, and it's just this really nice item. I have to say though, in the review, it did a pretty good job of it, and obviously these links will be in the show notes. For the price, I thought it came in around $500 or something like that for this little device. It's almost $500, it says, and it has a full-size keyboard, but the keyboard is a little bit smaller, obviously, to be able to fit into that compact style. And so check out the review. I'm really curious. Is anybody interested in writing on the road, and whether or not this will actually be something you think about?
Well, I mean, I am interested in writing away from my office, and I am in this weird. I told you all before we began the program that I'm dealing with my back right now and having trouble sitting at my desk, or sitting. In fact, I'm taking my client calls like reclined on my couch with my legs elevated, which I can do thanks to Bluetooth and an iPad. But what I haven't been able to figure out how to do in that posture is write, like to actually write. And it would be awesome to have some way to either write like with a stylus or to type that would be able to be small enough and stable enough that I could do it away from my office or away from a table. And I'm curious to know whether this device might do that.
No.
No. Okay.
Okay.
Like
this thing.
So
this thing has a spot.
Augusto and then Art. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
But that said, there is, and we will share it in the notes, and I will email it to you already. I mean, there is a foldable desk that we have recommend to a couple of people with back problems who have that exactly what you described. They cannot sit in the normal chair. They need to go. And the cool thing with that one is you can put it in any kind of angle that you need, and you can move it, and it's super light when you both fold it over, and you can now put a full laptop in there. Yes, and that's the thing. And I will for the people who are listening on the podcast, I mean, just show me a picture. Sorry you missed it, but the item will be on the link. But what I didn't like about this, and where they lost all my thing, is, I'm going back to my comment, is 2020, people. When you develop a software, a hardware, look what technology has been developed. Okay, in 2020, a keyboard need to have backlight. Okay, I want to be able to work in the dark, and this keyboard does not. And the moment you do that, you lose the thing for me, because that means now I need to have a light in order to write. And I don't want to have that. I like the darker the room, the better I write. So that was when that thing died for me.
What exactly are you writing in the dark, Augusto?
Don't ask that. Don't ask questions you really don't want to know the answer to. So.
Oh, you underestimated me. I want to know the answer.
Okay, I look at this kind of a device, and I know it has a spot in the dust drawer next to the Remarkable 2 that it will be bought and never used. I mean, if you want to see this device in its original origin, go Google the Radio Shack Model 100 that came out back in the late 70s. Yeah, it's a single-purpose device, but I'm a fan of the chef Alton Brown and his war against unitaskers. To me, this qualifies as a unitasker. What you're going to pay for that thing, and I don't even, what you're going to pay for that.
He's looking for the people who is listening to the podcast. He's looking for his unitasker.
Get an iPad.
See, that's the thing. What you would put into that fixed device, this works just as well. I can flip it around. It becomes a tablet. It becomes a stylus. All that happy stuff. I get the purpose. Again, it's a tool looking for a problem.
That doesn't fit in your pocket, though.
Yeah, but neither does that thing.
No, go ahead, Ami.
Well, it sounds like it does from the dimensions that you gave us, Ray.
Then
Yes.
I can spend $40 on a Bluetooth keyboard and use my phone and have the same size screen.
I am still waiting for my WayTools text blade. Again, if the text blade folks, the WayTools folks are watching, I want my text blade. I've been waiting several years for production of it, and I'm looking forward to it, which will allow me to, in essence, take my overly large phone that I purchased to be overly large just so
Right.
that I can do that. And but the ongoing issue that I find is that, again, with a tool like this, if you are a heavy writer, and I'm always in production of something that is writing focused, think about this from the context of, if you want to write, you need to create an environment and context clues that you are writing, and that means a device that does that. So again, I don't disagree with you, Art. I think that there are a few people who are watching now who do write enough who would benefit from a single tasking tool like that, and for those folks, I support your choice. For the rest of us, though, I think that you can convert. Choose a Chromebook Flip. I think there are several other tools out there where you can just very quickly, easily have that same functionality and not need it if you don't need the very strict context. Okay, we're going to move on because we have lots to get through. I just wanted to make a quick note that, hey, the new email service from the folks at Basecamp, they have put out a new feature in their tool that they call name tags. Name tags are akin to signatures. They say, they quoting here from their tweet, with less restraint. No, with restraint, it says. And so, in essence, it's plenty of space to have your contact information and credentials, but of course not having overly large amount of space in that email signature. So I'm going to presume it's email signatures light. And I actually support this. I'm not actually that big a fan of email signatures. I'm very well known for jamming a lot of content into my own email signatures, and I had to work a better part of 25 odd years to start limiting those for myself. And I've come to a place where I'm mostly comfortable, and also recognizing the environmental impact of email signatures. They have an environmental footprint. They have a carbon footprint, and so I'm supportive of Hayes' choice to add them, and I'm glad that they are coming with restraint. Next up is, I'm not quite sure why this is in the rundown, but I'm going to just go ahead and notify it that Todoist, if you didn't know, I think we've mentioned it in past episodes, they have a beta program, and you can join that beta program, and that is for all three of their platforms, free, premium, and business services. If you go to beta, B-E-T-A, or beta, if you're across the pond, .todoist.com, and that will go ahead and give you the opportunity to go ahead and apply for the beta program. Okay.
Can I just?
We're firing the guy who make the show notes in here. We are going to fire him for filed in not in the announcement.
You know what, though? Being part of that beta program is really good, actually, because I'm part of it, and it gave me access to their boards modeling before they released it. So it was a nice opportunity to do that cross comparison. And I recommend, if you have a product that you like and they offer a beta program, get in on it. It's your opportunity to provide that organization feedback. And as a part-time developer, that's what I want to hear. I need people who are going to look at this with a passion to tell me what they really like and what they don't, not after it's released and everybody's screaming at me.
No, I quite agree. I'm in several beta programs for that very reason, to give feedback. And if Google File Manager or whatever it's called would let me be in a beta, I'd give them plenty of feedback.
Well, you can actually join as a Google Drive product expert in the product expert program and give feedback. So yes, I am a Google Chrome product expert, and give lots of feedback.
That link is going to get so many. They are going to get so many feedback from me, and I mean.
Yep.
Well, yes, it is available, and they do listen. I mean, Google does a great job of having a lot of team of people supporting and listening in help.google.com, where the community support threads are created. So if you do have an issue with Google, you can go ahead and air both your grievances, compliments, and feedback requests all at help.google.com. And so that brings us to a little bit more Google news. We came across a The Verge article on the best Chromebooks to buy in 2020, and so I couldn't help myself. I have been eyeing a new Chromebook. I have several of them, and I have decided that I have my heart set on the new Chromebook. That is the Acer Chromebook Spin 713. And so they listed about 6 or 7 different Chromebooks that are on the market today, and it really is. I mean, the Chromebook Spin 713 from a specs perspective, as well as the fact that it gives you an HDMI port. I'm just very excited to see the Chromebook in my hands once I get it. And so, anybody else thoughts?
As we have said on the past shows, we have seen more and more aggressiveness coming from the Chromebooks, and they announced that support now for some Chromebooks for 9 years. So it is really interesting to see how they have changed in their approach, and they're really now trying to get in the hands of more people. And yeah, these Chromebooks, it's I don't know if they're going to have a big challenge going from the idea of the Chromebooks are cheap to the Chromebooks are high-end, similar to what happened to Microsoft when they introduced the Surface, where people were convinced that a PC was a cheap piece of hardware, and then suddenly Microsoft came with this Surface, really high-end, higher price than better components. I mean, Microsoft did an incredible job with those machines. They're not repairable, but they're good machines until they die. And I'm curious what is going to be the perception of the public into now that they are bringing this and these high-end Chromebooks, and if people will have the technical knowledge to understand the difference between the $150 that you can buy on Best Buy versus a much more higher one.
Well, you guys know I live for Chromebooks. I love Chromebooks. That's kind of my thing. There's 3 parts to this equation that I think people need to take into consideration. One, it doesn't matter what device you buy. It's still Chrome OS. They all work the same. They all act the same. There is that uniformity. But the second part, and probably now what is the more important, is you have a decision point that you can make. You can buy a low-end, basically disposable device and know it's going to work the same way as that high-end one from a software perspective. But if you're going to invest in that high-end one, and this has been the liability for the longest time, people would put $800, $900 down on a Pixelbook, or $600 on a Samsung one, and go, okay, but is this going to work more than 3 years? I couldn't go and buy another version of the software to upgrade. Now that's not an issue anymore. Google's committing to 9 years in many cases. So if you are investing in something like this and you want to buy a good solid Chromebook that's $800, high-end specs, you're going to get a huge return on that investment if you're investing for the life of the device. If it's not that case, then go on the low end. It's not going to hurt you anything. You can always upgrade later.
Just a little bit of devil's advocacy here. I would suggest that very few people will stick with that device for 9 years.
You're right.
Because the built-in psychological obsolescence will outweigh the utility of taking advantage of the 9 years of support. So Google wins either way. They're offering 9 years of support, but you're still going to trade it in after 3 years if you're enough of a technophile to spend the money in the first place.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because it's the same mindset that goes along with phones. When you look at smartphones, and
although that's slowing down a little finally.
Well, Samsung has finally committed to, I think it's 3 years on their newest devices for software updates. And with phones, it's always been, you get maybe 2 years, because that is built-in obsolescence. They want you to upgrade. Things like Chromebooks, it doesn't push, they don't get as much of a direct turnover and rollover with that. And there's a whole different shift. If we go all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, the shift to the remote work environment, specifically in the education space, Chromebooks are ubiquitous now. Every school, all over the place. And I have to chuckle because there's a school district near me that's making the arguments, we want to buy iPads for everybody. I'm like, or you could go buy 4 Chromebooks for every iPad and be able to power wash it and be able to do, and if some kid drops it down the flight of steps, nobody sheds a tear. Right. So it's a different technology. When Microsoft brought out netbooks and started to go down the netbook path, the thinking was there, but it was too early. It was just not ready for prime time. This stuff is. I would never hesitate to tell somebody to get a Chromebook if they weren't sure what device to get.
Yeah, and I may say that agreeing, I don't think most people will keep their Chromebook for 9 years, but corporate will keep you with that thing unless you're a
Mhm.
friend of the IT. Okay. And but also for the personal, it's good for me to know that I will buy that Chromebook and I will be able to pass it to my kids and don't think, okay, now I'm passing, we are experiencing something like that. I live on an iPad. But
Mhm.
then my son iPad now need to be updated. That then put me on the argument: do I buy an iPad for him, or should I, continue pushing down the technology when you have the 9 years? And by the way, yeah, that's what is going to happen. I'm getting a new one, and
Mhm.
he's getting the old car. Okay, that's how
Yeah.
it's going to happen.
But
But
you can do that without hesitation now. That's
that's
the
the
thing.
difference. That's the difference.
So a couple of important points to take into account here. One is that the article covered several different, what are in essence consumer-focused laptops. So we have the Chromebooks and the Chromebook line. Those are Chrome OS devices, and there's actually a whole market of other Chrome OS devices. There are Chrome Bits, which are basically larger
Mhm.
than thumb drive size devices that you can plug into any monitor, and they turn into basically a full-fledged computer. All you have to do is have a Bluetooth, keyboard and mouse. And then you have Chrome boxes. Acer actually just announced two sets of Chrome boxes. One, which is a smaller form factor, considered kind of like a Mac Mini style device, as well as a desktop, a mini desktop tower. Those are Chromebit Enterprise, and or Chromebox Enterprise, whatever. Either way, they're enterprise devices and they are built for enterprise. So in essence, Google is getting both sides of the coin here satisfied. Then we go on to the Chrome base. This is an all-in-one. There's a screen. It's basically a monitor with the computer bits built into it, and so it's all-in-one. All you need to do is plug a power cord into it and mouse and keyboard, and you're good to go. You can also actually install Chrome OS onto a literal thumb drive and plug it into devices and run Chrome OS off of it. So you have lots of form factor capabilities, and you're going to see Chrome OS make its way into all of these different these form factors because of that. Now, as I said before, I'm a big fan of the Acer Spin 713. For $600 USD, I think it's a phenomenal price for a really solid device, especially considering the HDMI port that it provides. I have the Chromebook Duet, the Lenovo device. It's a budget-friendly device that can double as a small tablet. And I have been using it over the summer. I bought it on a whim, and I've got to tell you, I am so very happy with this device. Again, it's not the most powerful Chromebook out there, but in a flash, I can go ahead and disconnect it, and I've got the keyboard disconnected from it, and I'm good to go as a tablet. It has a little kickstand that I can use. I can use it as a tablet. It really is a great multi-function, multi-purpose Chromebook. Then there's the Asus Flip, and I think that's probably the other side. So Acer Spin 713, and then on the flip side of that is the Asus Flip C434. That's a 14-inch device that comes in a 13-inch footprint. It's a really nice big display where they cut off the sides of the device to be able to slim it down, so you have a nice form factor while still retaining a pretty good sized screen. And so I think those three devices, hands down, become the tools that everybody should look at when they're thinking about a new laptop going into the market.
Can I ask what may be a stupid, naive question asked by somebody who's never had a Chromebook? If you have a Chromebook and you're using Chrome OS, are you wedded to Chrome versus Firefox, Google versus Bing? Like, I have de-Googleized my life. And largely just because I just started getting really, frankly, just enraged by the amount of data that was following me around. I mean, it just started to really enrage me when I was shopping for mattresses, and there was literally nothing I could do on any screen that didn't hit me with a mattress advertisement, at which point I stopped using Chrome, I stopped using Google Search, I stopped using all of it on my phone, on my PC, on everything. Which I periodically regret, because it is true, Google is the best search interface. But are you stuck with all that if you have Chrome OS?
Art, you were about to answer.
Yeah. You're not stuck with it. but it's not like adding another browser to a Windows machine. So, for example, by default, Chrome is your browser. You're running in a browser. However, most Chrome OS machines or Chromebooks will run Android apps. So you can throw Edge as the app on there and run Edge as your browser, run the Firefox, run Opera, you can run tons and tons of different applications from the Android store within the Chrome environment, depending on the Chromebook that you have. Is it the exact same as the desktop one? No, because it's basically a smartphone app being run on a Chromebook. But most of them will run full screen. Most of them are very robust and very solid. So I would be of no hesitation to, for example, like I said, put Edge on there and run Edge if you want to run Edge, or run Firefox, or run one of the others. The advantage you have is that you can do that. You have that choice and that capability at that price point. Again, the user experience is different. It's a bit different, but it's nothing to the point where you won't be able to get done what you want to get done.
And on Chrome OS, you can actually activate Linux, and basically Project Crostini, you can activate Linux and actually install a wide variety of other browsers that are that have, say, DuckDuckGo or another privacy-focused search engine built into it, and just never log into Google on the Linux side, and your footprint is minimal in that sense. So you
That's
do have
really
a lot
the
of
question I was asking. Yeah,
Yep.
because like on my Samsung, I lose a ton by not using Chrome. I mean, I'm really giving up a lot of functionality, and it's sort of annoying.
Yeah, on the enterprise side, if you do have a Chromebook Enterprise license using Google Workspace Enterprise, and then you have a Chromebook that has Enterprise license on it, you can actually install Windows on those, and then basically boot otherwise. So you have a lot of flexibility on the system now. It just, you would have to have a lot of technical savvy to make that stuff happen. All right, everybody, we have reached the end of our first set of headlines. After we come back from the break, we're going to cover our second set of headlines. And so now, a word from our sponsor this week, W3C Web Services. See you on the other side of the break.
Did you know half of small businesses don't have websites, and half don't make it past 1 year in business? Are these stats correlated? We're not sure, but we think you should have a website. W3C Web Services provides affordable managed WordPress website hosting, along with VPS, domain name registration, and other small business-focused services. For listeners of this podcast, you can book a free 30-minute digital marketing strategy session when you purchase a new hosting plan, $150 value. Once you purchase your new hosting plan, forward the receipt to support@w3cinc.com with the podcast title in the subject line of the email message, and we'll get you scheduled for your digital marketing strategy session. Head over to anythingbutidle.com/webhosting and get started with your small business website today. And now, back to your show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Anything But Idle, the productivity news and technology commentary show. And today we have Art Gelwicks and Ami Devereaux here today with us to talk about the productivity news. And so before we broke, we were talking about some news out of the Chromebook world, the various Chromebook models that are now on the market and our recommendations. And now let's get into our second part of the headlines. Augusto, we've got some Apple news. Can you blaze us through the Apple news? And you are up. Go for it.
Yeah, we have some Apple news that we may cover pretty quickly. One is the update of Dark Sky, an application that Apple bought, and now they close their Android part, and they're integrating. They finally update the application. There was some discussions if the application was going to die or survive. The application survived, just get updated. Even that some of the features got incorporated on iOS 14. So it's $3.99 on the app. It's really a fantastic app. That what they were doing was really, really fantastic. So if you are on an iPhone, make sure that you check the update. The next news is tomorrow, or regarding tomorrow. Today, if you're listening to this on a podcast, November 10, 2020, Apple is going to do another special event, One More Thing, on November 10, and we will be covering this live on Wednesday at noon At least we're going to have Michael Slinsky in the event as we talk into the live, and obviously we'll make it to the podcast later on. And the other two news were a couple of things that we discussed on events and weeks prior. One is that you can switch now the default on your home pod for the Apple Music service to Pandora. And I think that's a big deal. Was Apple trying to break the tides and put some coat of paint on the antitrust? No, no, no. Look, we're not are letting you do these kind of things. Okay, the house looks much pretty now. You can come and see.
And Michael Slawinski, who's the CEO of Noseby, he called it. I mean, he said when I mentioned that it was remarkable that Pandora was not listed on there, that he said, oh, they're going to bring it. They just want to, not say their name from the stage at the event, and he called it. So
yeah. So and the last news is Spotify, that also we discussed about podcasts and Spotify and really how much Spotify has moved. Now finally you can stream their music on your Apple Watch even without the iPhone. And that is great. Not only that you can do that, but that finally that is getting that Apple Watch to really be an independent thing out of the watch and out of their iPhone and everything else. So the last Apple news is Apple released 14.2 and iPad OS 14.2, and it has a bunch of set of new emojis, including what is called the thong a sandal. Okay, that for anybody who grew up in a kind of a Latino environment as I did, will remember their mother throwing the thumb sandal. So the first thing I did as soon as I get the update was send it to my mother with a note.
This is a remarkable piece of semantics, which is that Australians, they call them thongs, and others around the world who learn British English we call them sandals or flip-flops in North America. And so yes, we now have the what I would call flip-flop emoji,
Yep.
which will also have a fun kind of double meaning, right? So we can start using the flip-flop every time a politician flip-flops, which is what I will be using that
I don't know.
emoji for.
I upgrade my mother to 14.2 and she sent me one, and I respond with respect, okay? Just for the record.
Oh, yeah.
All right, wonderful. That brings us on to a bit of news out of BGR. BGR did a little bit of an announcement about the Raspberry Pi 400, and this is super exciting for me. Raspberry Pi is a small form factor device that people can purchase. They can actually put the Raspberry Pi operating system onto almost any device. These are built by the Raspberry Foundation, and in the spirit of using the Raspberry Pi OS, the idea is to create low or inexpensive, highly affordable computers. And so the Raspberry Foundation has now launched the Raspberry Pi 400. And what's unique about this is that it is all compacted into a keyboard. So you have all of the computer guts, and in essence, you just get this nice, slightly smaller than full-sized keyboard, and it has everything you need to be able to run a full-sized desktop computing environment. Of course, you are running a Raspberry Pi OS, which in essence means you're going to have to learn a little bit about how to work the PC in a non-Windows or non-Mac OS world, but not that far cry from it, because you install Chrome and you're good to go. You install Microsoft Edge and you're good to go. Because they are Chromium based now, you can install them with very little difficulty. It comes with every kind of back-end port that you can think of. It has an Ethernet port, so you can plug into the internet. It has Bluetooth LE. It has a USB power cable that's USB-C, USB Type-C. You've got an SD card slot, HDMI, micro HDMI to HDMI cable, so that you can go ahead and connect to a monitor, and pretty good specs. It's got a quad-core 64-bit processor. It's got 4 gigabytes of RAM, and does 802.11ac wireless. As I said, Bluetooth 5.0 BLE, gigabit Ethernet port, 2 USB 3.0, 1 USB 2.0, 2 micro HDMI ports, a micro SD slot, and a 40-pin GPIO header. So it just comes with like everything. I mean, you have to be doing like high level, not high level, but Arduino style building of things to want the 40 pin. But it's just a really, really great device, and it comes in at a whopping $70 USD. $70 US. If you want the high-end package that comes with the USB cable and otherwise, it's a whopping 100 USD. So for that kind of device, I mean, you can use it as an entertainment PC for your living room or den. You can use it as an additional computer. Just add the monitor and keyboard and mouse or trackpad, and you're good to go. I am super excited about this. I cannot wait to get mine in the mail. And I'm not telling anybody that I bought one, but I'm waiting to get one in the mail because I just really I just can't wait to see this thing in action.
Anybody else remember the old Commodore 64?
Oh,
Just
yeah.
asking. Okay,
Absolutely.
well, there we go.
Yep. But think about the power and versatility of this comparative to my Commodores. Oh man,
totally good. And see, this is the kind of thing for that price point. This becomes truly an extension of your IoT setup. You can integrate this into a lot of places where you would never consider dropping a computer. I mean, I'm going to look at getting one specifically because I have access to what's called an X-Carve system, which is a CNC machine for actually making, wood carving and things like that. But you don't want to put a $500 computer next to it because there's a thing called sawdust. But a $70 Raspberry Pi that could act as a controller, that's perfect. That's exactly what this type thinks. And you know what? If you put a screen on it, you could use it as a portable writing station. Wait. Okay.
Nice callback there, Art.
Oh gosh. No, I can't wait to try out my Pi 400, and I will certainly be reporting back when we do. Okay, moving.
But it's actually super interesting, and for those who want to geek out or who geek out, what people has been doing with this Raspberry Pi is incredible. And what this brings is now to the new level. You can now bring it to the kids, get the kids interested in the technology and all that. So I did not do it like you. I'm not expecting one. Santa is sending me one, and it's coming in November.
The only thing I'd say about it that concerns me is that we're having this huge equalization with respect to hardware and software, and we're not seeing an equal and concomitant equalization with respect to access to the internet. We still have a massive digital divide in this country and in much of the world, and I don't see at least the U.S. government doing anything to correct that.
Well, I think that... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, with that, the difference is between caring what the user's doing and not caring what the end user's doing. That there isn't...
Well, the device is useless if you can't get on the internet. I mean...
Yeah, I get that, but there is the people using the devices have no control over the pipes, and that's the problem.
I'm not blaming
them. I just don't see that that the companies like Comcast and other ones, they're like, the more devices out there means more consumption of their bandwidth, therefore direct revenue consumption or direct revenue generation. That's their math. That's all they care about with this stuff. When it comes to the governmental influences on it, if the government actually gave a hoot, we'd have municipal Wi-Fi everywhere.
We do in some cities like Chattanooga, where they have a very forward-looking digital divide closing strategy. Right. But we don't. I mean, we have huge tracts of rural America that are finally getting Wi-Fi thanks to small, tiny private companies that are going in and putting in Wi-Fi using suboptimal 5G in order to wire it. Because agricultural businesses can't function without IoT devices, and they don't have internet. They don't have high-speed internet. So, I mean, I
don't disagree.
I think there's a split argument here, though. So I fundamentally believe that yes, the polity deserves internet, and I think that it should be a fundamental right. I don't think of this as being kind of like, oh, everybody should have access to the internet in the very light sense. I believe that it should be a fundamental right. On the other side of that, I deal with small business. Absolutely. I mean, what happened with the rural electric cooperatives, in kind of really our golden age of industrial revolution, we had that whole operation come to bear by force of federal dollars, and it helped to light up a lot of agribusiness in the United States that otherwise wouldn't. And we need to have that same level of thoughtfulness about spreading internet to the far-flung areas of the country. It's also one of the reasons why you can take a train across the country and pay smaller fees in rural areas and pay higher fees in New York City and otherwise. It's just a reality factor that we have to subsidize places that otherwise wouldn't get it. So we need to think about how that works and operates in our own country. And the other side to this is small business. I support and help small businesses every day throughout the small business development centers in this country, and it's really imperative that small business, for economic purposes, have access to broadband. So not just internet, not just high-speed internet,
No, I mean
broadband.
high speed when I say that. Yeah, and and it's not just in the far-flung areas. I mean, I live in a relatively major metropolis where a huge portion of our poor residents cannot get Wi-Fi. These poor students literally their parents are driving them to the parking lot of a Dunkin' Donuts in order to get Wi-Fi so these kids can go to school.
Right. And a lot of these mobile broadband providers, your device has the ability to create a hotspot, but they're not doing it. They're charging an extra $10, $20, $30 a month on top of it to basically make an extra buck, when in reality, that can really fundamentally change a child's education. It can change the culture within a family. Like all kinds of things are impacted by it. And we saw this in the pandemic when companies like Cricket Wireless and Otherwise, which is an AT&T subsidiary, gave hotspot access to all of their providers. The students then could access their parents' phones, internet access without extra cost, and that allowed them to gain access to their school and schooling and being touched base with social workers and other types of support networks when you have child, investigations as well as domestic abuse issues. All of those things are impacted by the coordinated efforts of the internet today. We need to have strong internet infrastructure. I always joke that, you can go to Tokyo today, and your phone would light up like no tomorrow on the weakest network. Here in this country, I can be in the middle of Manhattan and have struggles with getting basic LTE. It's just it's ridiculous.
The internet that they're getting in Seoul ubiquitously, we get virtually nowhere here unless you pay for gig service. And I mean, even with gig service, you're not getting what they're getting on the subway in Seoul.
Yeah. Right. But let's take into consideration a couple things. And please do not think I am defending the infrastructure companies. I used to work.
It's not just the companies. This is a government.
Well, hold on. It's more than just government. I mean, I used to work for an infrastructure company for a long time. If you look at the example we gave earlier about electricity, to get electricity into the Appalachians required a Great Depression and the Tennessee Valley Authority to actually dump millions and millions of dollars into running electricity into points where a private company would never do it because it's not profitable. There is no cost value. We see the same thing in rural areas where if you're going to run physical infrastructure to those locations and you have 20 people in a town versus 200,000, the cost value isn't there. Capitalism says make the dollars you can. So does it have to be done by the government? Absolutely. But then we have this push by, and I don't want to get into the politics side of it, but you have lobbyists who then push back and say, well, no, you're not allowed to do that. We need to be able to compete. Well, I'm sorry. You're right. This absolutely should be like water, sewage, electricity. It needs to be treated like a municipal utility. Until that happens, we are not going to see this ubiquitously. It's not going to happen. If you look at the way Seoul does it, if you look at the way most Southeast Asian countries do it, heck, if you look at the way even Germany does it, the way they approach it is as a utility. We're not going to see that anytime soon. I'm sorry. I will disagree all day long if we think that the governments are going to make that change. We can't do it within local towns. I mean, you mentioned Chattanooga, which I think
East Tampa. So, and And just as a matter of interest, water, sewage, and electricity, we have huge tracts of America that don't have running water.
Exactly.
So,
And that is the operative problem with this.
right.
Internet will never be considered an equal utility. And this is
We
really
don't
me
need to
getting...
guarantee the other utilities.
Well, no, because it's about information. And information is power. Those who control information control the power. If you can control over large tracts of the country the access to information, you can determine who's going to have access, who's going to be able to know what.
The only thing I would say, though, is that access to broadband internet is not just about information. It's also about 911 dispatch. It's also about GIS location and polygons. Mm-hmm. It's also about IoT infrastructure to make sure your road traffic lights change when an ambulance goes through. I mean, we are entering a world. I mean, my background is in smart cities. We are entering a period of time in which the lack of broadband is going to doom huge parts of America into being essentially developing nation quality infrastructure and not having access to the basic services of life. Forget the information that populates those services.
Right. But what we are talking about is information. I'm sorry, I cut you off and I apologize.
I mean, no, it's not just that. I mean, we're clearly on a tangent here. And you and me we need to have a podcast or something where we just
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right, though, about when I talk about information and you talk about the things, we're still both talking about information. Whether it's information,
bites, yes.
Yeah,
bits and bytes.
It's bits and bytes. And I always go back to the question, who does it help? Who does it help? With all the things you listed, it helps the people. It helps everyone living in those areas. When it comes to the physical deployment of infrastructure and who's paying for that, that's the hard part. Because
no, it's not a hard part if you have a government that's committed to it. I'll tell you who pays for it. I pay for it. You pay for it. We pay for it in our taxes. That's how we build roads. That's how we build highways. That's how we ought to ensure that every inch of this country has broadband internet and, by the way, running water.
Yeah,
so
totally
and
agree.
Again, I'll close out on this, which is that we have to be very mindful of the fact that if we use the utilities model for the internet, we also come into some very clear, sticky legal waters as it relates to how we monitor and handle that access to what we consider a utility, which is why I call it a right, not a utility. We should, just like you don't have a fundamental right to water, the reality is that you do have a fundamental, if anybody wants to debate riparian rights, please feel free, but you do not have a fundamental right to water. The reality is that you should have a fundamental right to the internet, and that changes the conversation behind having access to public utility and the idea of access to the open web. And there's a very clear difference and delineation there, and I would even argue that there's a difference between having access to infrastructure pieces such as IoT for smart city infrastructure, or even 911 and other kinds of things, comparative to the data flow that's required for the information flow to be accessible. So it's a very complex topic, and I'm really interested in having this conversation both online and offline later.
Another day.
No, but it underscores the importance of this dialogue being had across the party aisles, right? Because people good people, of all persuasions politically, can have differing opinions on this, and we can come to some central understanding of how to move forward on this. And of course, there's a big business versus small business argument versus, data in the hands of the people versus data in the hands of the powerful. All of those conversations need to be had, and we have to come to some level of not just compromise, but in the Dr. Stephen Covey perspective, synergy, so that we can all have a better, more powerful foundation for America to prosper in and amongst all of the various global powers that are out there. We will set ourselves behind if we do not solve this problem in the next few years.
Just to, again, for another callback, if we think all the way back to the beginning when we were talking about remote work may be what catalyzes a lot of this. Because,
or maybe remote school.
Well, I'm going to lean more on the remote work side, and here's why. Because you can tie dollars of revenue to accessibility from remote locations. So if I have a company that I'm going to have my employees working from home 50% of the time, there is a benefit to to them having good internet connectivity from that location to be able to work and generate revenue for me. Therefore, I have a reason to go sit on my local government and say, hey, get them to improve this infrastructure. I can go to my infrastructure companies and say, hey, make this better. It's a compelling thing. Public education doesn't have that leverage as much as they'd like to. Parents can jump up and down all they want, but it still doesn't change the tax revenue base. And honestly, schools don't control the pipe between the buildings. So
I would just say one thing as a rebuttal to what you're saying. The reality is that remote work has been exclusively the province of white collar workers. And white collar workers are not the predominant population in which this is a problem. This is a problem for blue collar, frontline, imperative workers, the people who work in Walmart, Amazon warehouses, fast food restaurants, Jiffy Lubes. They are the people who are really affected by this, and they are not working remotely. So for their employers, this is not an issue.
And I totally agree that they benefit from the end result. However, the information technology workers are the ones who also happen to be the ones who work with building the infrastructure. So whether it's right, wrong, or otherwise, they have a much higher level of influence over making this happen.
I don't debate that. I just don't think they have the problem. So I don't.
They have the power though to make change. I think is the point. I would also disagree that education is not potentially the space. I think we keep thinking about this in terms of short-term solutions, and I agree with you, Art, that they have the voice because they are the software developers. They're in and working in those environments where kind of the first world problems become the lightest and loudest thing that we talk about. Like, oh my God, I can't get to Starbucks because of the pandemic. When there are people out there who are not capable of feeding their families because they've lost their jobs and are not capable of doing this. So there's clearly a chasm between what is spoken in the media versus what is happening on Main Street. But the idea here that I find to be fascinating is that we sit back and we don't presume that $1 spent on a child doesn't beget a tax basis in the future. And so we need to really start thinking from a long-term perspective. It's not that I disagree with you, but I just really fundamentally need us all to have a long view here, that when we educate our young, we get a benefit from it in the future. And this whole notion that more mature populations tend to vote against infrastructure in schools and education because, well, they're not going to be around long enough to care. That whole notion needs to stop, and we need to stop thinking. I'm not even
sure that's true anymore.
I don't know, but it's a trope, right? But all of those tropes need to kind of fall away so that we can understand that dollars spent on our kids are investments in our future. And if we are handicapping our kids, and I see this all the time, I see young entrepreneurs come into the SBDCs, they want to start a business and they don't know how to use products the way that they need to in order to be able to truly be effective in a business today. And so they come handicapped by virtue of the fact that they can't touch type. They can thumb type. They can't touch type. Things of basic productivity that they just don't have skills.
I cannot touch type.
and the argument there is that at some point you'll just speak to your computer and it'll type whatever you want. But when you're working from home and you've got a dog barking and you've got kids on your lap and other things are going on, voice typing is not so easy. So touch typing is actually a very, very useful and fruitful skill. But either way, and we should
learn it as an adult. It's very hard to learn as an adult.
Get a Colmac keyboard and you will thank me. But anyway, I think this is great. Let's move the conversation along to a Forge article that came up, and this was all about avoiding burnout. And what the article author talks about, Darius Farrow, what he talks about is this idea of setting a minimum output level, and he uses the example of Stephen King, the author, the novel author, who chooses to write 2,000 words per day. That's his minimum output level. He uses that as an example from his book on writing. It's actually one of my favorite books, and I read it every year. So there's On Writing Well, and then, of course, On Writing by Stephen King, and Zinzer's book is an absolute must-read once a year for me, along with Getting Things Done, and then of course On Writing by Stephen King, and he talks about the idea that he spends his time every day to write 2,000 words, and then that's his minimum output level. And in essence, by setting that minimum limit, we actually create and beget consistency, which then reduces burnout. Thoughts? What did you think?
Tyler Cohen says the same thing, that he writes every day. It's the one thing he does every single day. And it's funny because I took that on as a practice for the year. And then when the back thing happened, it all went to hell. And it's been very sort of disheartening. I think there is something to that, that if you have a minimum threshold of whatever your production function is, whether it's writing or podcasting or coding or whatever you produce, that the consistency of meeting that threshold produces expertise, of course, produces a habit, but I think it also produces excellence.
Yeah, see, I'd be inclined to agree with you around the habit side of it. I mean, you're establishing repetition, we've talked about it in the past where it almost feels uncomfortable when you don't do it, which is the difference between a habit and I forget what the other thing was. But anyway, I get it. I think it's good. I have to challenge it when you take it into an interrupt-driven environment, because it's so easy to get something like that derailed if you're in a highly interrupt-driven environment. But it's absolutely worth trying in my book. I mean,
maybe you reduce the threshold. Maybe
well, and that's, I get it. And you're right. Maybe you could, I think about it for myself. How low of a threshold could I bring it down to still feel like I'm being productive?
Or 250 words a day. Mm-hmm. That's one page.
Yeah. Yeah, you certainly could.
That's one long email.
Right. And I think that's the reason why things like this are brought up, not only just in this context, but in so many other contexts. I mean, you don't eat the whole elephant. It's one little bit at a time. Well, that's the same thing we're talking about here, breaking tasks down, breaking exercises down into something consumable. In this case, we're just saying that we're going to consume it every day. I mean, I'll do another throwback. One of the things Microsoft has built into their software now is the ability to create what's called focus time. Well, focus time, you can tell it, I want 2 hours a day. Find it in my calendar, and it will run through and put in blocks of 2 hours a day. Well, I could use the exact same model and say, I want 30 minutes of writing time. Run through and figure it out. And I know in 30 minutes I can generate 2,000 words. Great. I have committed to doing that. And as long as I have that personal commitment, and I'm sure Ray and Augusto will chime in on this as well, somebody to hold me to that, then it'll work. But that's where I fall off, is that nobody holds me to it. And then I can go hide.
There are two things on that. One is, I think, if I'm not misquoting, is Seinfeld, who said that he started putting paper clips together, make a chain and don't break the chain. But the other thing I discovered recently is the watch. So get the activity. Doesn't matter if not exercise, okay? But get the watch to track, or find one of those applications that can track how much time you have been doing it and will report it back. And there are tons of them. And what you accomplish with that is now you start getting into that thing of, oh, I want to see it again. Or you start seeing how much volume of writing. And not all the writing will be good, but it's what it's going to do. Meditation, I track it in my watch as mindful, whatever it's called. Okay, but what has changed that for me on the meditation practice is now I can see how many minutes I meditate into that, and has make it a really positive thing for me.
I think there's a really great kind of adage from a behavior change thought, which is reduce the scope, keep the habit. So if you're going to try to undertake anything and become good at it, you have to do it regularly. It really doesn't matter what it is. Even without the 10,000 hour rule, which is questionable, the fact is repetition generates excellence. You become a better writer by writing. You become a better speaker by speaking. You become a better runner by running, and on and on and on. A better, more mindful person by meditating. And so if you want to develop that muscle, whatever the muscle is that you select, you must do it regularly. But the trick is, for Stephen King, 2,000 words is inconsequential because he has all day to write 2,000 words. That's his vocation. But if you or I wants to become a poet, we probably need to write 3 lines of poetry a day. Not a poem, not the Iliad, not the Odyssey, not Longfellow, but 3 lines. If you want to become a better meditator, meditate for meditate for 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And if you want to run, walk out the door and run to the end of the block. But do it every day, over and over and over. And slowly but surely you become better at whatever that is. I'm still not sure, Ray, what any of this has to do with burnout.
Yeah, so the argument that the author makes is that what we tend to do is think that more is better. And by limiting our work to what is the minimum output level, his MOL concept, is that we are actually suppressing the urge to overwork. And so if we just choose to show up and once you write those 2,000 words, just to continue the analogy from Stephen King, then you check out. You walk away from what you were doing, and you should be and feel good enough about that level of work. And what most of us do is we say, especially in the productivity world, right? Can we jam more work into that same amount of time, which is why I fundamentally reject that notion that we should be productivity should be defined as getting more done in less time, right? It's about getting the right things done in the right relationship with all of the other resources around us, and you have to have some kind of intentionality toward these things, otherwise they go out of control. And when your intentionality is getting more done always as the metric, that's a rate of diminishing return on all kinds of resources. And so I think that's where the author was getting at, which is this notice of, no, you're not trying to get everything done. You're trying to do a few things critical well that are going to be able to ultimately build consistency, right? It's like the idea of the overnight success 20 years in the making, right? We constantly hear this notion that there was an overnight success, and it's not true. There were a lot of failures.
True for Justin Bieber.
Thankfully, I barely know who that is.
But he was not old enough for it to have taken 20 years.
All right. So with that, I appreciate everybody. We've closed out our headlines for this week, and we are now going into our Science of Productivity segment with Matt Plummer from Zervana. And so with that, take it away, Matt.
Hi, this is Matt with the Science of Productivity segment. In each segment, what I try to do is bring some new research to the table on how you can improve your performance, accomplish your goals faster. In this week's segment, what I want to do is share 2 different types of research or pieces of research on how to improve team performance. And so Google came out, with their Aristotle project a few years ago with this shocking insight that the number one predictor of team performance for them was psychological safety, which essentially, if you haven't been reading up on it, is the ability to feel comfortable sharing one's perspective and being transparent as an individual without fear of consequences. And so since that time, there's been a lot of, suggestions made on how to increase psychological safety. A lot of them are, small tactical ways to do that and largely intuitive. Well, today's segment, I want to focus on some new research that shares 2, new or, affirms 2 ways of doing that. The first has to do with where the leaders and senior people on the team direct their visual attention, their gaze. Where do they look during a team meeting? So if you've ever been in a meeting room, you know that most people, most of the time in a meeting, are directing their attention towards their visual attention. They're looking at the most senior people there. Most of the meeting goes that way. Well, if a senior members of the team direct more of their attention towards the lowest status members of the group, they're looking at them more, that actually does 2 things. One, it increases information flow through the team more equitably, and also the research showed that it improved their collective decision-making ability. And so that's one simple way, just looking at other people, the more junior people on the team. Anyone can do it, but it's particularly powerful if the leader's doing it. Increases information flow and decision-making of the team. The second has to do with what psychologists call social worth affirmation. So one of the reasons why people don't share in the context of a team is they worry that, what they share, people will think of them less or ultimately even reject them from the team. And so social worth affirmation is where you give people confidence that they're accepted, that they're valued, and that they belong. And what they found is that if you do that outside of the context of, doing work in the team, that when people get into that context, they actually feel more confident and worry less about that. And so 3 different research studies show that leaders affirming people's worth, affirming people's sense of belonging, increases the way information flows in the context of the team. So that's another simple way that you as a leader can improve your team performance, both looking at people more, which I know can be hard in Zoom context, but particularly in in-person meetings, looking at lower status members of the team more often, and then affirming their worth outside of the meetings. Thanks for listening to this segment of the Science of Productivity.
Wonderful. Welcome back. Thank you, Matt Plummer from Zarvana, for our Science of Productivity segment. And now we're getting into our segment, which is the new tools of the week. In essence, Augusto and I come across many personal productivity tools and services each week in preparation for anything but idle. And of course, there are tools that we use all the time that we think you may benefit from. So in this segment, New Tools of the Week, we each bring you a tool we think you might like. And of course, we give our panelists an opportunity to share a tool they love with you as well. So new tools. My first tool is going to be the tool Rescue Time, and it kind of has a little bit of a connection to our discussion today. And so let me bring it up on screen so you guys can see this. Hopefully you can now see this. Wonderful. So this is Rescue Time. Rescue Time is a tool that allows you to, in essence, track your time. And so what you can do is you can not only track your time, you can also go ahead and passively track your time into the future so that you don't have to actually capture that time yourself. So it's what I call passive time tracking. So it's just doing that data tracking in the background on mobile and desktop, which is really helpful. The other thing that the product does is it has the ability to go ahead and block certain things. So you can say, I don't want to actually gain access to Facebook for the next 3 hours while I get something important done. I can go ahead and do that. So it's a really useful tool for being able to do that level of blocking of things while you are productive. And so with that, Augusto, what's your tool this week?
I pick a tool similar to what you're saying, and it's to build it on the Mac OS and Apple, screen time. And screen time for me has two uses. For me as the adult, figured out where, what are the apps and these categories that I'm spending time. But for the kids, as a parent, allows me also to limit what they have, at what time their device shut down, at what times they can or cannot get access to certain things. And they can authorize what other things, if, for example, their devices says they cannot play a game after 8 p.m. They can come and request more time, and I can authorize it. That is really cool. But also allow me as a dad to start early teaching them where are they spending their time on the devices. They're invisible to the devices. So I think it's important. And for me as an adult, it's really cool to get the report every week, of how many hours I spend in front of the Mac and the other devices.
Fantastic. Art, what is your new tool this week?
I don't know that it's necessarily new, but it's something that I think can really help people. If you're a Notion user, you're interested in Notion, one of the common things that you'll hear about Notion is, I don't know where to begin. It's got so many tools and capabilities in it that it's hard to find a starting place in many cases. Well, Notion provides the Notion template gallery, which is loaded with different starting places around topics for school, for profession, for projects, you name it. The thing that I like about it is you can select any of these templates, click on the template and say, add to my environment, and you're off and running. And you can then deconstruct the entire template within your environment. I have used this just to get a better understanding of the product, but also to actually be able to stand up things that I'm going to use and not have to go out and build them on my own. So if you're a Notion user or even interested in getting started with Notion, take a look at the template gallery to get an idea as to what it can do.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Ami, your new tool this week
is Miro. And this is not so much a personal productivity tool as a team organization tool. So what this allows a team to do, this is actually related to the video we just saw about engagement. So completely coincidentally, I published an article that went up today on my website. It'll go out tomorrow to subscribers, about managers not being engaged, which is 71%, by the way, of your disengaged employees. And one of the reasons that managers are so disengaged is because they are not included in strategy. So they are charged with producing metrics or producing the fulfillment of goals, but those goals and metrics are separate from the overarching vision and strategy of the organization, assuming the organization has a strategy. What Miro allows an organization to do is to drill down from very, very huge macro vision into the most granular elements of the organization, including the product, the engineering, the project management of any component piece of those parts, the human resource training and development to establish the competencies and skills. And everybody in the organization can see the cause and effect relationships between their most granular element of work and the most macro goals that the organization has and the fulfillment of its vision. It has umpteen templates, more than you can possibly imagine. Everything from strategy maps to flow charts to product maps to, just anything you can imagine. And it's incredibly intuitive. And in fact, I'm looking at using it myself for virtual strategic planning, because obviously not having everybody in the same room together demands new tools to bring everybody into the conversation and develop strategy. And Miro is one of the tools I've seen that looks the most flexible to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ami. Thank you, Art. Thank you, Augusto, for our new tools of the week this week. And so with that brings us to our final story of the week, which is our featured story of the week. And this is near and dear to my heart. And it's one of the reasons why I brought up my new tool of the week, being Rescue Time, which is that Remember the Milk has now provided and added support for Zapier. For those of you who don't know, Remember the Milk is kind of a GTD-inspired task management tool. And it's one of the kind of first, the kind of grandfathers of that space. And so they've just been around, plunking along for 15 years. They just celebrated their 15th anniversary, we mentioned last week. And so this week they announced that they were adding Zapier support. Zapier is that web-based workflow automation service, that platform, similar to IFT. And what it does is it allows you to be able to set up connections between different web services for them to basically do conditional, functions. And so Remember the Milk has had IFT support for many years, and now they have added Zapier support or Zapier support. And so I wanted to kind of contextualize this. That's kind of a little drop in the bucket in terms of one task management software providing support. It happens to be the one I use, and so I am very excited about that. But in the context of workflow automation, we are seeing more and more APIs connecting to each other to the point where we are going to have what I think is a much more substantial infrastructure where, with no knowledge of code, we are able to now create our own personal productivity systems. The system that I dreamed of 25 years ago, where I'd be able to create my own dashboard that everything talked to each other and I wouldn't have to worry about being locked into any environment. And I'm really curious about all of your thoughts on what this really means as more tools become API centric and start to allow each other to both speak to one another and share data securely and easily. Ami, go for it.
Oh, sorry. It looked like Augusto was going to talk. One of the things that this called me back to was the conversation very early on in this meeting about whether it would be Microsoft or Google. And I think one of the things we're seeing, and by the way, Miro also has APIs with every possible platform and function you can imagine. So, if you're building in whether it's Slack or Notion or, every possible modality that companies are using to build product, I think what we're seeing is that you don't have to choose. You don't have to choose Microsoft or Google. You don't have to choose Dropbox or Box. You don't have to choose, Slack versus Google Messenger. You can choose everything. And if everything talks to everything, then you have an incredibly configurable, you have the potential for configuring your very own individual idiosyncratic productivity environment that calls upon different tools for your different priorities at any given moment.
I think between Zapier doing this, and yes, I agree, it's really, really exciting to be able to see how these automations are getting simpler, but also getting to the hands of the non-techie people, okay, that for techies, yeah, things like this one way or the other has been possible or semi-possible. Seeing tools like Zapier who really make it simple, bring it to that level, it's really exciting. It means, it shows how important is and how really this will come to change for a lot of people, again, who are not technically savvy, to be able to do even the simple automations that some geeky people have been able to do for a lot of years, and how much this will implement into the IoT on the houses. Yeah, me too. I also been that geek, but it is really cool to see that now when I can see, my phone knows when I'm getting home, so I turn the right lights and open the garage, and people don't look at you like, how'd you do that? It's cool to see that's coming. It's cool to see that you get certain kind of emails and you don't need to, people now have access without the uber geek to be able to explain to them how they can get those kind of emails and convert them into PDF into the right folder so it disappears from the email. Seeing that come into the hands of the non-technical savvy people, it's awesome.
Yeah, there's two things that this calls out to me, and it's actually related to the two companies I keep talking about. One, Notion is a great example of a company that has had a blind spot to this for a long period of time, because one of the biggest complaints about Notion is no API access. And I actually asked in one of the Facebook communities about that. So when you get the API, what are you going to do with it? Because it's a lot of people jump at them and say, I want access. Companies have to recognize as they develop software that external and data portability is key. If you want to have a product that's going to work in this environment, you have to be able to provide external access. With that, though, Microsoft, come on guys, get on the stick here, have killed themselves with their licensing model in this exact same area. They have a tool called Power Automate that allows you to build these kinds of workflow structures, and yet 95% of the tool is not available unless you have the very expensive premium licensing. So from an enterprise standpoint, yeah, fine, pony up the money. But it doesn't change the fact that this is a critical thing that makes all your products work better. So companies like Zapier that are able to provide these interconnects are still beholden to the software companies that are writing the primary applications. So somebody like a Miro, who has all these kinds of open connections and can interface with other systems, well, if one of those other systems says, no, we're going to put up a walled garden again, or we're going to charge you extra to be able to have access to this, they're really not being able to see this in the bigger picture. And you said earlier, Amy, that we shouldn't have to choose, or we don't have to choose. And I would tune that a little bit. We shouldn't have to choose, and that's what makes our choice that much more important right now.
I think that's a fair point. And I think to your point about if a particular platform says to Miro, well, we're going to close off our API walled garden, you're out. It won't take long for that functionality to be replaced by some other tool that will open its API to Miro, because all of Miro's users are already hooking it into every other tool they're using. And they're talking to the platform they're using saying, hey, I'm using Miro, you need an API integration. And so whether it's Miro or, or any number of other tools. And I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, I saw this with the companies I ran. The most important feature for us early on with mobile payment for parking was our integrations. We had boards of directors saying, no. We're only going to use, a debit wallet with a credit card. And our customers were saying, no, we want PayPal. No, we want Venmo. No, we want Zelle. No, we want, and you know what? If you don't do that kind of an integration, you're not going to make it.
Oh, totally. I mean, this goes back to probably the most important part of this entire thing, which is it's all about the users. The users, what they want is what you need to build to. You have to meet them where they are, because they're not as dumb as we used to think they were. They know what they want.
At least attend to what they want to accomplish, even if you do it in the way that they hope you will. Right.
I mean, when we look at these types of technologies, now, that being said, I think these technologies have a ways to go yet. Microsoft is famous for this lovely phrase of the citizen developer, which just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But these kinds of tools get closer. IFTTT has been much closer to that ease of use level than Zapier has for a longer time, but Zapier's more powerful. So,
And IFTTTs break all the time. I mean,
yeah.
I must have 2 alerts a week telling me that this or that IFT isn't working.
Now, and this is a good example of the change in the environment and the model, because IFTTT just released IFTTT Pro to
Right.
be able to build, and they've added extra functionality in there, multi-layer routines, being able to provide logic in it. There's a lot of value
And
to
your
there.
own price.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
greater
and I did
stability,
that.
greater stability of the service, right? So on the IFT, you weren't paying for it. On the Pro, you are, and you get greater stability.
And I'm all for that because, and like other podcasts would say, support your devs. I'm totally into pay for the service that you want to keep. I get that. I just think that, again, we're at that threshold, and it's not up to the companies providing the connections. And again, to call back to our infrastructure thing, Zapier's infrastructure. It's the endpoints that have to get it right. And every company, every product we're looking at, we should be saying, okay, how do I connect to your product? And if I can't, in my book, that's a non-starter. I mean, I'm still beating on Notion just because it has so much functionality that I will continue to use it, but they got to get that functionality out there.
Yeah, so I have 2 points before we close out. One is Microsoft, you did me wrong by renaming Power Automate from Microsoft Flow. Best name ever. Why? Why'd you ruin it? Microsoft Flow is definitely the better name. 2 is we have to be mindful of the fact that a lot of these APIs are currently not beholden to a specific, no specific territorial law that forces them to give up data to users as they use them. They are currently processing huge amounts of data, and if something like GDPR comes to the United States, it will have a profound impact. Right now we have California with some semblance of that kind of law, and we need a federal law that brings us into the 21st century for this data management. And we are all kind, at least those of us in technology, are kind of on pins and needles, because when this becomes a reality, what happens to the API? The API becomes somewhat of either something that becomes virtually impossible to support from a compliance perspective, and the API should be an open protocol. It should be allowed, and it should be feasible for small companies like IFT and Zapier. I mean, they're not big companies, to be able to support users in having data portability and this kind of data automation. If this happens, then only Power Automate really is the company that can withstand the force of compliance when, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of users request their data to be pulled out of all kinds of services all the time. This is a huge problem, and I think that we need to get our hands around this from a federal legislation perspective. And so I really urge those who are on state legislatures, those people who are in Congress on the federal level, and those who are speaking to other governments that have already done that. I really don't like the notion that GDPR has become kind of the boogeyman of the world in the way in which they've done this. Several other countries have these kinds of laws. We should get on the same page and figure out how to deal with an extraterritorial compliance issue that doesn't handicap technology. You can see Google is battling this out in Europe right now. They were just a new antitrust law, a lawsuit was filed against them in what country? Another country, not the United States. And so they're going to have to
France.
France, yes, thank you. And so they're going to have to battle those issues, and a lot of that has to do with data management, data privacy and protections. We have to get this under control.
This is going to be very interesting to see what happens with the new California law that just passed on a referendum, because that's a much more stringent rule than California has heretofore had. And it actually goes slightly further than GDPR. And because California is A, so large, and B, the hub for so many technology homes, we're going to get to have this very interesting experiment that's going to force the innovation necessary to deal with this, that potentially is a model for federal legislation. So I'm watching that quite carefully to see how that plays out, because that may be our future federal model.
Yeah, I personally think that this will only come to a head when they finally face the issue of data ownership. Mm-hmm. You own your data. Privacy, everything else, that's just control over the information. When it is finally decreed as to, this is my data, I own it, I need to be able to pull it out, make it go away, do whatever I want with it, and have the rights to it so that you can't sell it to anybody else. Then this starts to come to a head. But I saw the same thing with the California law, and I'm very curious to see how that evolves.
It does a lot of what you're describing. I mean,
right.
The right to be forgotten, right to have your own data, right to opt out of any kind of use of your data. I mean, it's really quite a far reach. I'm surprised that it's gotten as far as it has. Delighted, but surprised, and very anxious to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see this grow, but
yeah, and I'm actually a little bit more conscientious about the fact that in the United States we have this kind of individualistic perspective on a lot of what is data. We presume that things are more private than they are. We believe that we have more rights regarding privacy than we do. For example, I can look in your living room window if I'm walking by on the street, and I'm not committing any laws, any crime by doing so.
But I have the right to close my curtains.
Right, exactly. And this is the problem, though, right? Like what you do in the public forum, what we decide are the public fora, are still undefined. We are we are really nascent in the birth of the internet and the open web, and we have some kind of issues to deal with. What is the public forum? How do we deal with privacy in those contexts? And just like the screen capture of a tweet, is that my private information even though I've put it out in the public sphere? It's just like having a picture taken of me on a public street. These are things that need to be dealt with, and we really haven't dealt with those things. Ultimately, can I then retroactively ask for someone to delete something that I did in a public forum? These are questions that are very hairy, and they need to be fleshed out. And do we really deserve greater privacy protections in certain regards? And I'm a very private person, but I'm not going to use my individualistic perspective on that to hurt the common. And we need to remember that in all law, we are harming people when we withhold information, and we have to get over this notion of there only being one right way to manage data. Data isn't just one type of data. There are many different types of data, and we need to start thinking about what types of data is metadata about me private, or is it not private? There's all these kinds of really interesting splitting of hairs that we actually need to do in order to have a just application of the law, which means the law needs to be updated because it's
we don't even have law to govern most of this. Right. And we don't even have words to talk about a lot of it. But at the very least, one thing ought to be clear, which is that if on the front end, we ought to have the ability to say what's mine and what's not mine. And that, what happens after the fact, post facto, if I tweeted drunk one night and I was an idiot and I put something out for the world, that you're right, that is splitting hairs, and we can talk about that down the road. But right now, we don't even have the wherewithal to close the curtains.
Yeah, I think the strongest thing we have are in essence data breach notification laws that give some semblance in state by state mishmash of what would be considered private data. Personally identifiable information is not all of the data about me, and it's certainly not protected under all of those laws. And so you're absolutely right. We do need to define what personal data is. Full stop. The gestalt of what is personal data, and then to what level is privacy toward that data, and to what level every company, as well as the federal government and state governments, are required to protect that data. There needs to be a duty of care here that we don't currently have. Art, you're going to have the final comment on this.
Yeah, just one thing, and I hate to be the devil's advocate on it, but we have to take into consideration the fact that when we try to push the issue of things being protected and private and this is my stuff, there is a cost that is tied to that, not a personal cost, but an executional and an operational cost. And that cost can be prohibitive at times, to the point where, fine, then I just won't give you an API for it. I won't create that connectivity because it's not in my company's, my organization's, my financial best interest to bear the burden of that. And I work with a lot of financial services clients who deal with personally identifiable information and that sort. And many, many, many times, what you would consider the best approach is not even considered because of the possibility of personal identifiable information being shared or remotely accessed. And there is such a hesitation at that point to say, look, the cost justification is just not worth it to them. Whether it is for us, that's a different conversation. But that's what compels a lot of them.
Some of these businesses may need to change their models. I mean, if it's cost prohibitive by virtue of the way that you're priced or the way that you deliver your service, that's where strategy comes in, and you need to revisit that. So I don't necessarily think that the world of technology and the business models of technology goes unchanged in the face of this. I think that these constraints on data will ultimately force a rethinking of how we deliver technology service. And that may mean that API integrations are not free and open to all at every given moment, or that Google's not free. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a really valid point. And this is that core piece. They need to be thinking about this all the time, thinking
Absolutely.
beyond the dollar, thinking beyond their immediate need to the greater good. That's that's rainbows and unicorns.
Or finding a way to have the greater good and also reclaim profit through some pivot in their delivery model.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I agree.
This is a very complex topic, and I really appreciate everybody's insights into this and giving us the opportunity to talk about this, because these are the conversations I think that everyday people need to have about these topics so that we get a better handle on it. We're not all going to know all the right things about technology until we've all had a chance to kind of talk about them and dwell on them and think about them in different ways. And so with that, I just have an announcement. For those of you who are not aware, Cal Newport, Professor Newport at, I think he's at George Washington University. No, he's at Georgetown University. He has come out with a new planner called the Time Block Planner, and he's hosting an event on November 13th called the Time Block Academy, and he's going to be talking about the planner. And so I just wanted to let folks know who are interested in time blocking in kind of the quote-unquote deep work perspective. He's got this new planner. It's a physical paper planner, is my understanding, and he's talked about it on his podcast, which is Deep Questions, and he has this upcoming webinar. It's a Zoom webinar that he's doing on the topic of the Time Block Planner. So that is there. It's coming, and good on him for bringing that to the world. So with that, that brings us near to the end of our time together. And so I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists, Ami Devereaux and Art Gelwigs, for joining me here. Ami, where can folks find you after you leave the show tonight?
At beyondbetter.io. You can find the blog that I mentioned. It's already up, and you can email me from the contact page.
Thank you for being on Anything But Idle, Ami.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ami.
Art, where can folks find you?
Well, you can find me over at the Idea Pump. That's where I hang out. That's where I stand on my soapbox. And honestly, I'll probably be going over to Beyond Better IO tonight to have a look at what Ami's got, because she's got better ideas than I do. So
thanks for joining us as always, Art, on Anything
My
But
pleasure.
Idle.
Thank you, Art.
All right, Augusto, thank you so much for joining me here on the show this evening.
Thank you very much.
As
It was
always, for
really
helping
fun.
me to make the show happen. So with that, everybody, just a couple of things. If you have a story that we missed, if we missed something, feel free to head over to our contact page at anythingbutidle.com. That also contains our show notes, our transcript, and it contains links to all the stories, plus more stories that we didn't get to cover this evening, our new tools of the week, and anything else that we want to share with you there. So head over to anythingbutidle.com and you'll find the episodes right there. The latest one will be on the main page of the site. If you want to, you can also tweet or DM us at anythingbutidle on Twitter. We have our tweets and our DMs available to you to reply to and to message us with. If you have a question or a comment, otherwise you want to send to us, again, anythingbutidle.com/contact, and you'll be able to find us there. If you're watching the live show, feel free to click on the thumbs up, and you'll be able to help us open and broaden our listening community, our watching community for our live show. And then, of course, if you are listening to the podcast after the fact, you can go ahead over to anythingbutidle.com and subscribe. If you happen to come across us on Google or otherwise, you can learn how to subscribe by going to anythingbutidle.com/subscribe. And of course, if you could rate or review us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or otherwise, that does help us as well. And so thank you for doing that. So with that, everybody, take care. Have a great evening. Here's to your productivity success. and good night.